Hello, welcome to the February 25th, 2025 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the live stream today. And I'm presenting from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. area. I work as a product specialist for primarily focusing on Steinberg products for Yamaha Corporation of America. If you're watching the live stream live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance by emailing clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could simply ask your questions in the chat field. And today is the last live stream of the month, and per tradition, we will go for about 2 hours and have a 2-hour we'll have a 2-hour Zoom social starting in about 2 hours. I posted the link already in the comments field for the Zoom meeting, and it's always wonderful. It's always wonderful to meet different people, and it's like a nice little social gathering. So I look forward to it every month. So please, I'll try to post a link periodically. I'll try to do it every half hour, but it's in the current chat field at the beginning, so you could kind of look for it there. Maybe if other people could copy it and put it throughout in case I forget and am busy answering questions. So after the live stream and after the Zoom social, I will go through the live stream again and put all of the topics that have been discussed with timestamps, and that will be pinned to the top of the comments field so you can navigate to questions quickly and easily. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to set that up. I'm just going to do a quick audio test, so everything is sounding okay. And also, we have two people that serve as moderators. So I want to thank Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They just kind of do it to make it a better community experience for people. And I also want to thank Jazz Dude for work that he does on compiling a lot of information on the Cubase Nation Discord. So if you're looking for lots of additional tutorials and stuff that's relevant for the Steinberg community, that's a great resource for that. With that, I guess, so again, you could ask questions in the live chat, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so we see Jazz Dude is on. We have Robbie Bowling checking in from Dallas. And we have John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Rudy from South Africa, I believe. Jason Sykes, who I believe is in South Shields, UK. We have Trance 2020 in Berkshire, UK. All right, so we have a question from Matt Elliston. Hi, Greg. Question, please. Cubase 11 Pro. Please could you demo how to change the tempo of a selected region of multiple tracks while staying in the correct pitch, please? Thanks in advance. Okay, so let me just jump to a different project. Okay, so let's say we have a number of audio tracks here. And if we open up my tempo editor, it'll open a tempo track here so we could see. So I think currently we have a fixed tempo in our project. So, and we're going to have the tempo set to 100 beats a minute. So if I turn on my click, we can see that we'll have our click kind of being at 120 beats a minute. And I'll just go ahead and raise the volume of the click a little bit. Okay, and as audio is recorded into Cubase, it's going to be tempo stamped. And we could see this when we go to our pool window. So we could, when we go to our pool window, we could actually just kind of look at a particular file, and we can see what the tempo is. Now, so if you don't know what the tempo is of the file, you could do a tempo detection from the project menu, and then if you wanted to go to under the audio menu to advanced to we'll say advanced to set definition from tempo. At that point, that will kind of set the tempo information and apply it to the files. You could also manually enter it in. Now, once the audio files have the correct tempo, all we had to do is we'll select all of my audio tracks here, and we want to place them into musical mode, either on the project window here from the info line, or again from the pool window. So if we come over here, we could see from the pool window, we could also place these into musical mode. So once we have this done, like I say, I just want to put a tempo change in here. So let's say starting right at this measure. So as soon as we get to this measure, now all of the tracks will speed up significantly here, and it should be like and that would be all that you'd need to have to do to change tempos. So, and it looks like my bass track isn't in musical mode. So now if it's in musical mode, so we'll just kind of come right over here. So whatever tempo we have, so again, the pitch is the same, but all you have to do is just kind of put the tempo change in. And if it's in musical mode, it will automatically speed up without changing the pitch. It could change the pitch. Now, there are different algorithms. Usually by default, it'll be set to like Elastic Pro time. If it's set to tape, this will mimic a tape machine. So if you change the tempo, that the actual the actual pitch will change, like kind of doing very speed processing on a like a tape recorder, an analog tape recorder. Okay, so we see Alexander Plasko checking in. We have Demetrius from Greece. Thanks for joining us today. We have Ranfree from Arkansas. Uno Memento from Finland. We have Renee from Quebec. Crocante from Los Angeles. Okay, so we see a Cubase session has 3 files, a CPR, a back, and a .csh file. What is the .csh? I think it might be, just take a look, see if I could. Bear with me, I had an email come in real quick. Okay. Okay, so when we have a CSH file, if we've done offline processing for a particular file, so when we come here and let's say I have a range selected and I've done, I just come right over here and we'll do, let's say, an offline process. Like I wanted to reverse the bass. So I think as we play a particular file here, that all the information for the offline processing, that's what is in the .csh file. So it kind of keeps track of the offline processing, I believe. Okay, so we have Chris Hallam from Columbia, South Carolina. We have Stefan from Sweden. All right, we have David Griffiths from Wales and UK. And David Griffiths just saying, wow, just hooked up an external synth module for the first time. It just worked. It's got to be magic. So yeah, MIDI is a good thing. All right, and we have Soren from Sweden. All right, and David Griffiths is saying the like button is squashed. So yeah, if you do learn something new or like the live stream, please hit the like button. Okay, so we have a question from Alex Morgan. How does one make visibility agents, not configurations, but agents? Thank you. So I think when we go to our visibility agents, we could come here and select our different configurations. So if we go to configuration here, so let me just make sure I'm reading this right. So I think that when, like, if I wanted to do this, we'll just call this Alex. And now if I wanted to come over here, so I think maybe these are what you would consider the agents. So I think these agents are kind of fixed, but you could use the agents to, within the project, to choose different options. And if you wanted to kind of, so these ones are fixed within the program, but you could also just say, so if I'm here, we could save this as, all tracks in the project. So I'll just say, we'll save this as all. And then you could kind of toggle back and forth between the two. So we could think of these agents. Now, you could also kind of create agents. While it may not show up in the agents list, you could go to the project logical editor and choose to hide tracks that are, meeting certain conditions. So let's say, any track, you could say, I want it to transform, and you could say select, and then you could choose to hide. So if you wanted to come here and say, I want to select, we'll say tracks that have a name, let's say, so we'll say tracks, and the name is set to bass. And then we could, at this point, come over here and say, okay, this will select this name. And if we wanted to hide, those particular tracks, we could set a macro where we could just say, okay, I wanted to disable those particular tracks. So now if I have a different track selected, I could say, we're going to take every track named bass and disable it, or we could hide those tracks based on that particular name. So we could set up different project logical editor conditions, but it's not necessarily one of the agents that will come here. But those agents could also be those configurations can be set on a project by project basis as well. So you could experiment with the project logical editor settings. Okay, so we have Chris checking in from Jersey in the UK. All right, we see Mark Rabin from Montana. We see Best Korean Jesus from San Diego. Okay, so we see a question about MediaBay. So the question is, in the MediaBay browser, a click on user content makes the files appear in the result column, but in the right zone, click on media. User content shows only its folders. Why is it so? All right, so let's take a look. We'll look at our media bay here, and let's say we'll go to user content. And I'll just, okay, so let's say as I'm here, we could go, okay, I wanted to see, let's see, April 2nd rating. So we'll go through here. Okay, so we see results here in the media bay on the right-hand side. And let's try on the right zone media bay. So at this point, you know, we could see the folders, but I see where it's maybe a different like hierarchy, but all the content is still there, kind of presented in the same way. Sorry, I'll have that not automatically play. So I'm not sure why it's different, but let me just go back to my main media bay window here and see if I click on Yes, I'm not sure why it's different between the two. I could do a little more research if you want to email me to see. So it seems like it should be consistent. I would think it would be. But yeah, please send me email, clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I could take a look at it some more over the weekend. We see Mark Rabin may miss the Zoom because he's been stuck in the studio and he wants to make a great escape to the mountains. So it sounds like a good thing to do. All right, and we have Steve Allen checking in from the UK. I think he's in Oxford area. All right, and we have Johan checking in from Belgium. All right, and we have Jazzy Land checking in from Teaneck, New Jersey, and Kerwin Young. Okay, so we have a question from Jan from CubaseIndex.com. Says, today I got a message, external plugin is used, live mixdown will be used. How do I know which plugin is meant? I find the how to find the plugin, I guess. So you could see, if you come over here, you could just, you know, one, if you have external plugins, we'll go to your studio menu to audio connections, and all of your external effects should be listed here. So if we have this all set up and we go to the inserts, we could look for inserts that are using kind of the same, or send effects that are using the same plugin name. But if you wanted to isolate it, just come directly to your audio connections to external effects and you should see it there. I don't think there's a way of saying, you know, find a track that's going out to this plugin, but it's usually not too hard to find. All right, and Kerwin Young is checking in from Atlanta. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Mark Rabin, anyone have a link on it? Anyone have a link on a tutorial on how to use a pedal for punch in, punch out? All right, so let's say we'll set this up. We'll come over here to our studio setup and let's do a generic remote. So if you don't have a generic remote, just click on a plus sign and let's go to our generic remote. And what I want to do is to say, I'm going to say fader 5. and I'm going to just click on a MIDI learn here. So I'm going to set my input and output where my MIDI device is configured. So we'll say, okay, we're going to have my Nectar panorama. And what I want to do now is click on learn. So I'm going to do this, and you can do this for any fader. I'm just going to do it on 5. So as I do this, I hit my sustain pedal. It's now automatically captured that MIDI message. And what we want to do is go to fader 5 here, and we'll choose, I think we'll even try just transport to device. And let's see if we can just do record. Okay, so now as I'm just doing a foot switch here, so let's say as I have this track, I'll hit my foot switch. I hold it down, it's recording. I let go of the foot switch, it's automatically off. So that's how you could use kind of the generic remote. If you want to just do punch-ins with your foot switch. So press down, it's going to punch in, release the pedal, it'll punch out. So once again, in the generic remote setup, Mark, all you have to do is come over here and just pick what controller is coming in, and the same fader here, what you want to do is select the function. So if you get a transport to device and to record, at that point, you'll be able to just take any pedal that was captured from MIDI and turn that into just being able to punch in and punch out or record when the pedal is held down. So let me know if that helps. All right, John Costigan saying when you get a minute, hit the like button. Okay, so we have Patrick checking in from Ireland. We have Rick France from Oregon. Just says, thanks for these club sessions, Greg. So helpful. I'm glad it's helpful. Okay, we have a question. How do I save all of my Cubase settings, hotkeys for a fresh install? I've been getting a very strange error lately. So the easiest way to do it is to go to your edit menu, and you'll see a profile manager. And at this point, once you have everything set, just export your profile, and that will take all of your settings and into a profile that could be imported back into Cubase again, or it could be just imported directly into another computer. So once again, edit menu, profile manager. So you want to export the profile and then import it back into the computer. All right, and we have Benny checking in from Sweden. All right, so we have a question. Can I delete the previous versions of Cubase that I've updated from? I have Pro 11.4. I've updated from 9.5 through 11. So you could delete them. Usually the actual programs aren't that large. It could be under a gigabyte, like 500-600 megabytes. So that's usually not terribly big, but you can delete them once you have the other versions installed. Usually with hard drive space being really inexpensive comparatively, most people would choose to kind of leave the old versions on in case they need to access perhaps like a 32-bit plugin and like version 8 or something like that if there's some changes. But once you have your 11 installed, it's not contingent upon previous versions to work. All right, so we have Stefan Schwartz checking in from Germany, and he says he loves Cubase. That's great. We have Peter from Montreal, Canada, and he's happy that it's Friday. So we see in the edit window, is there a way to slice audio clips to transients instead of grid? Okay. So we could do this kind of in the sample editor quite easily. So let's say if I want it, let me just clear my throat. Excuse me. All right. So let's say if I want to just take these slices, so if I'm in the sample editor, I could go to the inspector and we could just go directly to our hit point detection. So let's say we'll double click. Now we have hit points. And when we get to hit points, we're going to say, let's just edit hit points. And at this point, we could just say, we could create slices of the events. So now when we go to slice events, it's automatically been sliced based on the transient for you. So when I go to select, and we could turn these into individual slices. We could also turn them into events quite easily. If you wanted to create a macro, if you didn't want to go into the sample editor, we could create just a macro, and the macro would be, there's, I think it's, if we go like Alt or Option N plus, so if we go Alt B, Alt or Option B, we go backwards by the transient, or Alt N. So if I wanted to make a macro that would just do, so we'll do a new macro. So I'm going to select that function and let's add it. All right, so I'm going to split at cursor. So we'll come right over here and let's add that. And I'm going to come over here to macros and I'll assign a key command to this. Let's see if I can find a key command I haven't used yet. Okay, so I will now just come over here, and as I do this, I could just hold down that macro and it'll automatically slice just like that. So there's a number of ways of kind of doing it. So if you want to do it that way with just a macro, and again, that macro was just navigate to so we'll come over here to key commands, and then you could just choose to, as we slice, so it's just transport, locate next event, edit, split at cursor, and then you could just kind of hold down a key command. It will just continue to execute that macro. Okay, just going through. Thanks for all the great comments and questions. Okay, so we just see, hi Greg, question here. How can I set in and out auto punch locators? Is there a shortcut? So if you wanted to set up kind of the locators for all of the different events, I'll just kind of come here. So let's say if I do the range selection tool, there's, so there is a preference. If you're doing this a lot, you could just say, I wanted to have, if we go to preferences to editing, you could do cycle follows range selection. So if you do this, the punch in and punch out points by default will be the left and right locators. And we could have that a bit different if you need to, but we could just come here and then just hit IO, and I will be punch in, O will be punch out. So we could just lock those to specific parts. So if you just select, I want to punch in this, I want to punch this word in, you could just select that particular range and just punch just like that. So that will set the left and right locators. Now we could choose to not lock the punch points. There's another method that you could do as well. And if we go to transport, there's this thing called punch points. So let's say I have my left and right locators, and while we're punching, maybe I wanted to give a couple of measures before or after. So we could actually, let's say now my left and right locators are set, and I will kind of decouple it so it's not automatically following the range selection. So if I have this set and I wanted to punch in the middle but still have like a little bit of tail and a little bit of pre-roll, if we go to the transport, there's also this function called punch points, and we say set punch points to selection range. So now it will loop this entire range, but it'll only punch in and punch out at where the punch points are. So they don't have to be tied to the particular left and right locators, but by default they are. So give that a try. So, but just when you hit I, that would be punch in, and O for punch out, that could turn it on and off. All right, so I see question, Greg, what MIDI foot control do you use? So I have just like really generic ones. I think I have an old Yamaha that I've had since college, but I have just kind of really generic ones. I probably should have all Yamaha ones, but over the years I just would pick some up. I have an expression pedal, nothing really generic, but nothing really special, but I do have kind of, remote, just really generic remote controls. And but, for my CC121, I have an old Yamaha. It's like a little more, like the really kind of, not like a piano pedal, but more of a switch that I've used for years. Continues to work all the time. So John Costigan just saying, Revelation number 1, momentary foot switch, punch in and out. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so we see, can you show some options of copy paste? Each time I try to copy a section of track to the end of the same track, it seems to paste on the same section. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so I'll just make this really big. All right, so let's say I want to take just this selection here, and I'll just kind of move it out with the range selection tool. So if I want to copy this if I paste it, it'll go right on top of itself, because where we're pasting it is determined by the cursor position. So if we want to, so if I'm at the beginning of a particular event and I copy and paste, where it again pastes is based on the cursor position. So if I move the cursor, then I could paste. Now, if you want this to automatically, like duplicate, where it'll just go to the very end, you could just hit Control or Command plus the letter D, as in duplicate. And then at that point, it'll just automatically it'll kind of copy and paste directly to the end of the event. But if it's pasting over, the paste location is going to be determined by where the playhead position is located at. So if you don't move the playhead, then it's going to paste directly on top of itself. And you may be wondering why it does that, but the location is based on the playhead position. So we just see, hi Greg, there are so many cool logical project editor macros. Is there a place where you or other people are sharing those macros as XML files? So I know I've given a bunch of presets to Steinberg, so they may, maybe I haven't checked to see, but there's a good chance that it might be included with future versions. And I think, we may see some more capabilities with that coming in the future. But if you have like particular macros, and I know someone had emailed me and I didn't send my macros to them, or project logical editor presets, I'd be happy to share mine if you want to send an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And you may want to, I'm in an incredibly busy time of work. So if I, some reason, forget, just because I've been doing like 15, 16-hour days last week or two, just send me another brain cramp email reminder. So, but I'll be happy to share everything that I've created. All right, so we have a question from Alexander saying, I got a question about Wavelab. Do you know where in the frequency spectrum the watermark function is in? When viewed, it appears to be in the low mid section. So I don't know what frequencies that it's actually where the watermark is going to be embedded. I could find out if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. I'm not sure if it's actually documented, but I may be able to try to figure it out. Okay, so we have a question. I got a question about comping /lanes. I use a MIDI modifier to randomize notes into scale. I would like to create unique lanes, but it only creates one. The workaround is to run it longer. Okay, so we see continuation. The workaround is to run it longer, but I no longer get lanes. I usually end up creating another track with multiple lanes after I chop it up. Is it possible to do this in less steps? Okay, so maybe instead of, what I would do so let's say, we'll jump back to a different project. So maybe consider doing track versions. So let's say if I'm here, all right, so let's say I'll just play some awful piano keyboard. So let's say I wanted to play that, and now if I just choose a duplicate version, so I could use this, And then at this point, I could choose to, modify within particular scales. So let's say, okay, I just want to go to my MIDI modifiers. And I'll say, okay, I want this to be within, let's say D major. So at this point, I could embed. So if I wanted to just come right over here, I'll say freeze MIDI modifiers. So we'll see these notes shift. But we could have the original version here and then work with this. So, see if you could, instead of working with different lanes, perhaps work with different track versions. And that if you wanted to maintain the original pitch and then you wanted to say this is my scale corrected, randomized randomly within a scale, you could just take the same data and have the two parts just accessed that easily. So let me know if that would work for your workflow. Okay, so we see, hi, when I export a song, the WAV file sounds with less quality than when I work with it, thanks. So there could be a number of different factors. So one is check to make sure that your master fader in your project is close to 0. So a lot of people will have their master fader volume down low, and they kind of treat this as their monitoring volume. But realize that if you have your master, if your speakers are kind of cranked up and you have your master fader here, that you could actually drop by minus 14 dB the gain as you do this. So, if you're in Cubase Pro, consider using the control room for the monitor. If you use this, your master fader is kind of your volume control. When working with this also, make sure that, if you're going from because everything you're doing is 32-bit or 64-bit floating point. But make sure that when you come over here, if you're going down to a lower resolution file, consider using the dithering plugin as well, like the Apogee UV22, and see if that will do the trick. But a lot of times when I hear that, it's just people, are using the master fader and they're dropping the gain pretty significantly, and it affects the output of the rendered file. Let's see. Any word on Cubase 12 date? I'll say it's soon. So, but it'll be out when it's out. So, but if you're waiting on, if you're considering getting the Cubase 11, Cubase 11 update to get the grace period, now would be a really good time to do that. So. All right, so we see from P-Zone 36, that's so cool with the macros. All right, so we just see a question. Can you explain what happens with mix-related automation when switching between mix console snapshots? So, just like we think of a camera as being a still camera, when you switch between snapshots, it's not going to include the automation. So, what I like to do with mix console snapshots is as I'm kind of building up an initial mix, before I get into a lot of automation, I will just take a snapshot and then be able to, come back to it. But realize that, just like a still camera doesn't capture video or kind of dynamic information that's going to be evolving and changing, that's how the mix console snapshots were kind of designed. Because it's difficult if you do a snapshot, at what point do you capture the automation? So if you're, utilizing the snapshots in your workflow, consider that it, just be, be mindful that it's not going to include automations for each snapshot, because the snapshot's going to be kind of a still picture of the state of the mix console. All right, so we just see just a quick question. Is there a way in Cubase that functions like Excel's F4 button? So I don't know what I just see that does the same thing last applied. So I'm kind of an Excel idiot myself. So if you could let us know what the function is, that would be helpful. You see from Nick, if you turn face into the breeze, you can smell Cubase 12 in the air, just like spring. So, and we see Mark Rabin's just curious he's wondering what that smell was. All right, I'm going to go ahead and post the link one more time here. All right, so I think I've already caught up with the questions. Everyone's enjoying their Friday, but let's go ahead and I know I had some questions that were emailed in, so let's get to some of those. Okay, so we just see a question: how to increase the number? Just emailed in. How to increase the amount of automation nodes when writing automation from a control surface? Okay, and so if we have, I'll jump back to a different project here. And I'll just revert to this. Okay, so let's say if I was doing automation on my particular file, so I'm here, let's go ahead and just write automation into our bass part. So select the fader. So I'm going to go ahead and automate. So let's say I just do, whether it's from a control surface or my fader, let's say I just do all sorts of really dense automation. All right, so now when I stop, I realize that, every single move that I made may be kind of truncated a little bit. So as we look at this, even though I was moving it like 1,000 times, we could see that there will be some reduction in what's actually captured in the audio file in the automation. And to change this level, we can come over to the automation panel and we hit the F6 key. And when we hit the F6 key, we could go into settings. And then here we can see a reduction level. So if I have this set to like 10%, as I automate different parameters, so let's say now I just will come here. So now that's only going to actually write 10% of, so our reduction level is 10% of what it was. So if I switch this to 50%, we're going to reduce the amount of automation. So half of the values that I'm using to write will now be captured. And this sometimes is because a lot of times, going from, two values, it's easier just to kind of have the program interpolate rather than having, 16,000 different little points in 1 second. So if you want to see the full, you could actually see kind of the reduction level and just set that, and then you could see the full automation if you wanted to. Okay, so we had a question that was emailed in. I ran into this intermittently. I would like to delete the tracks and folder I have highlighted. As far as I know, they aren't doing anything. There is no remove the track option when the individual tracks, having them all selected. Can you help? And in this situation, it was going to be where we added, let's say, a number of instrument tracks. So let's say if I'm here, I will add, let's say, a synth track. All right, so, and I'll just add a couple more. So when we looked at this and what the picture had shown was, when we go look at all of the different instrument tracks themselves, that we would see these in the instruments folder, something like this. So when I go to select all of the particular instruments here, there's not, when we right click, there's no remove instrument tracks, because these are, tied to the particular instruments. But as, to remove these particular tracks, we could just come right over here and choose no VST instrument. And you'll see that as we do this, those will disappear. So there's, these are almost like return channels for the MIDI. But if we wanted to delete them, they're not going to be, they're still going to be there because the instruments are actually loaded. So if we want to get rid of retro log, we would just choose no VST instrument. And if we want to get rid of the Hallian Sonic SE, select no VST instrument. All right, another question that was mailed in. I feel like we've talked about this before. Apologies if we hadn't forgotten the answer. I set my project window quantize grid to eighth note triplets. I check my quantize window, shows eighth note triplets, and audio warp is enabled. I edit part of a lower edit window. The grid isn't triplets and displays to be 16th maybe. In the main project window, the grid is triplets. What am I doing wrong? All right, so when we go to do warping in our, I'll just go ahead and convert, create warp markers from my hit points. And now when we go to audio warping, and let's say if we enable our audio warping, we could see, our different grid lines can appear here. So let me just make sure I have. Okay, so as we go to warp, let's say some different events here. So let me just. So, when we go to warp particular events when we're in free warp, so I'll just come right over here. And now that we're in free warp, as we nudge, we could nudge these to be snapped to, to the grid. But currently, if we have it set to use quantize and we have this set to eighth note triplets, it's not going to automatically snap that particular hit point to the grid. It'll just kind of snap it in tuplets in the sampler editor. So I know it's kind of a bummer when we want to have the snap turned on where we could, move the events based on the grid. But as we do this, we can move directly to this particular grid here, so we could have it snap. But it currently in the sample editor doesn't allow for triplets. Maybe in the future, I know it's a feature request that people have passed on for a long time, but currently it's only going to be snapping to tuplets in the sample editor. So maybe we'll see improvements with that. But currently, that's why, in the sample editor, it's only going to be doing tuplets and not following triplets. All right, let's go back to our discussion. Got through some of those questions. Thanks for all the great questions. All right. All right, so we see, is it possible to create comping lanes from the different track versions from freezing the MIDI? I forgot to mention it was for comping. Okay, so let's say if we're going back to our example where we're at before. So one of the things that you could do with this is, let's say we have our different track versions. So we have, this is our scale corrected version, and we could change the name appropriately. So we have this. So if I have this particular track version selected, if we go to project, we could now come over here and go to track versions, and then we could say create lanes from versions. So now when we come over here, each of those, so each of those could now be on different lanes. So try just to come over here to project menu, to track versions, and create lanes from versions. Okay. All right, so we see from Jazz Dude just mentioning, if you're on Cubase 10.5, it would be clever to update now to Cubase 11 and get the Cubase 12 license free via the grace period. So that would be a really clever thing to do. Hint, hint. All right. Okay, so we see Mark Rabin has a question. Crashing, trying to view log file, garbled. What am I seeking in this log file? A VST plugin that's giving me issues. So a lot of times, people will send me a crash report, and I'm not a developer and I'm not that smart of a person. And I don't understand it, but if you do, you could pass it along with a support request form. And then, they could, usually when I've passed them on for people, they've been able to say it's this plugin that's causing the issues. So it could be more of like a software development kind of thing that, that you need to be a developer to understand. But if you have a crash log, you could email it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'd be happy to pass it along. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to make a macro that with one key command exports the SATB voices from one part into their own tracks named soprano, alto, tenor, bass? Okay, so let me just come over. And I'll just put some chords in a chord track so we can get a quick SATB. All right, so let's say. Okay, so I'm going to drag these down to my MIDI track here. And I'm going to glue them together. All right, so I have some different voices here. So let's try this from the score editor. So you might be able to do it immediately, kind of in the score editors. Let's say we have a grand staff. And I'll just select a different split point. Okay. So I think in the score editor, if we come here to explode, and we could select to new tracks. So now when we do this, so it doesn't name it SATB, so we'll have kind of our original file, and these 3 files will be kind of split. So we'll place it kind of at the bottom. But when we do this, so, you know, so you could, if you're in the score editor, you could do the explode function. So, but there's not a way within the macro necessarily to name the tracks. I mean, we might be able to we can't rename the first track, but you could take this select, you know, if you wanted to take the selected track names, you could do it in a project, you know. So there isn't a way to rename it necessarily through a macro that's not faster than typing it in. But maybe if you try that function and see if that works. So again, once you're in the score editor, you want to just come to the scores to functions and then choose to explode and try that and see if that will just kind of get you 90% there. So if you're at the very bottom of the project, they'll all kind of go together. And if you did set up a project logical editor to rename, it could depend if you're at the top or at the bottom of if the track is at the top or middle or bottom of the project. So then that may bite you later with that, but let me know if that's will help get you there. Okay, so we have a question from Chris Hallam. Let's see. Is there a way to disable the one-to-one relationship between the mixer channels and tracks on the arrangement window? I guess I'd like the arrangement to be more music specific and switch to mixing later. So let's say if we have tracks here, so let's say we have multiple tracks on our project window. And we look at what's in our mix console. So, you know, if we have visibility, let's see if these are, I think we might be able to, let's come over here to the zones. All right, let's see if there's, so I think that there will be with the on-screen mixer. Let me just, so, you know, so I think that this will be kind of tied to, you know, a one-to-one relationship. But let me just see if we store different configurations. I thought there was a way to have kind of to the mix console. All right, so let me just try hiding some different tracks. All right, so when you come here, I know that we could on the main mixing, if you don't have the mix console here, we could choose not to have the project link, the project mix console linked to the main consoles. But when we're on a project window, there will be a one-to-one relationship. But if we choose not to sync, so let's say if I wanted to come here, I could go to my main mixer window. And at this point, let's go to mix console, and I could have kind of independent visibility settings. So let's say, okay, I don't want to see my bass or guitar parts here. So I could not see them in my mixer. But if you are working with the lower zone mixer, that will be a one-to-one relationship. Whereas these, we could choose to synchronize the project and mix console, or we could choose to not synchronize it. But the lower zone mix console will be synced with it. Okay, so we have a question. If I program CC64, a breakpoint for piano, is there a button that does that same function just by hitting the added CC value point? No programming again. Okay, so let me just open up something that has like sustain pedal on it. Okay, we'll just... Okay, so we have some sustain pedal here, and we're just going to reread the question. So let's see, if I program CC64 breakpoint for piano, is there a button that does the same function just by hitting the added CC value point? No programming again. So, I think when you're doing, let's extend the range of this part here. And let me just, so I think if we wanted to just add, let me erase some points here. So usually when you do this, it's kind of, as we kind of draw in, we could have it kind of be on or off. But let's say if I just draw in my piano near the top, or let's say if I draw it in, let's say, okay, so we have that as CC64. So, as it's kind of, I'm not sure if you're entering them in after the fact or if it's just kind of like but you could, if it's while it's being recorded, but you could probably also just switch to a different, I haven't done a lot of MIDI piano editing in a long time, but you could also maybe just try going to a square wave and just draw in. Just select the... So let's say if we go to our drawing tool, that you could just kind of draw in different values just like that. So maybe if you try just with the draw tool instead of the pencil and try to just set it to the square, you could try that. But let me know if that makes sense. All right, and we have JVI checking in from Amsterdam. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so he just said, I see a question. Sorry, I walked in late. Not sure if you covered this. Have this question about difference between rack and instrument channel. All right, so we'll just kind of start off brand new. So it used to be that we would kind of mimic the performance and the paradigm of having a rack full of instruments, like I have in my studio, like 20 some MIDI devices in racks. So as we kind of first started with this paradigm, and most people were migrating from a hardware integration workflow, we would have a virtual instrument rack. So if I wanted to load a virtual instrument, I would load it into a rack, and now I could play this rack. And so right now we loaded the instrument into sounds for it, and we could choose to create an audio. And we're asked if we wanted to create a MIDI track that's assigned to that particular instrument, which we just did. So say we come here. Okay, and that was how things were kind of done for a long time. So it was following the paradigm of having a, like we send a MIDI track out to instead of going to a hardware piece, that it's going into a software piece. But then as workflows have kind of evolved and people that never came up sending MIDI to a device, they just wanted a simpler way of doing this. So we created instrument tracks to simplify this process. So when I add an instrument track, I can now come over here and say, okay, we added a retro log, and now it's one track, so that as we go to this particular retro log, that we could now, have one track. So when we look at an instrument track, we have a MIDI track, and we can see this also when we go into our mixer. So with an instrument track, we have a MIDI track, and this is MIDI CC7, so MIDI controller for volume. And then as we would play this MIDI track, it gets sent out to this instance of Retrolog. So I'll open this up, and as we play, we will have so we go to our almighty strings. We should I adjusted the volume. All right, so I have a MIDI volume and also just volume for the particular instrument. But when I come to an instrument track and we load up the instrument track over here, this is consolidated. So everything is kind of going out of one mixer channel. So, but when I go to a MIDI track here, sometimes people go to hit the edit channel settings and they see MIDI data here. They don't see audio, because a MIDI track, it doesn't necessarily know exactly where the audio is being sent to, but an instrument track can consolidate this so that now we can just add EQs and effects without having to search for the audio return channel of where that VST instrument is. So VST instruments are more convenient and a little more straightforward because they consolidate the mixer, the audio mix components with the MIDI. And with a MIDI track going to an instrument rack, those two are kind of, can be tied together, but, they could be decoupled as well. So sometimes people will get confused with two different volumes. In early days, also, instrument tracks weren't set up for multi-timbral use and didn't have multiple outputs. So if you had an instrument like Groove Agent, you want to take the kick and snare and toms and hi-hats and overheads to different outputs, we would have to do that with an instrument rack. But over the years, the instrument tracks have added more functionality. So most people now are using instrument tracks for VST instruments and MIDI just only for external hardware, or people often use MIDI if they're using like a hosting program to host VST instruments on a different computer like VE Pro. So, but for most of the times, it makes more sense and consolidates things, and it's easier for rendering and different editing using instrument tracks for VST instruments. but we can't necessarily cut off the older ways of working as well, as people have grown very accustomed to those particular workflows. So, if we introduce a concept, we have to keep it for a long time or people will get mad at us. All right, so we see from Mark Raven, signature markers. Can we place them between measures? Seems they can only occur at beginning of measures. So, by definition, the signature can only occur at a measure start, which kind of makes sense. And if you need to put it, so let's say we open up a signature track here. So just let's add a signature track. Okay, so we're in 4/4. And let's say, okay, I want this to be 3/4. Okay, so let's say if we're in the middle of a measure and I want to put in 4/4 here, let's say at measure 24, that it's going to only allow me to put in 4/4 because at the beginning of the measure. And the reason why that is because if this was if we wanted to do 4/4 starting here, this would be, we could do that, but this would have to be a measure of 2/4. And then we could place, at the same position that start of 4/4. So with signature tracks, that's a signature for the measure. And then if you needed to put it in the middle, you would just have to go to the previous time signature. So if you wanted to start a 4/4 bar on the middle, on beat 2 of a 3/4 measure, that 3/4 measure is not a 3/4 measure. That 3/4 measure is a 2/4 measure. So that's why signature tracks only can occur on the downbeat because it's for the whole measure. So let me know if that makes sense. See from Best Korean Jesus. Wow, Greg, that is exactly what I needed in caps. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think track versions, there's a lot of great uses for those. All right, so we see Tiago from Brazil. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we just see, hi, Mr. Endo. Where are user effects and user VST stored? Many thanks for any info. So, if you, so you could find them in the media bay. So let's say if I came over here and just make sure I have the right. Okay, so say I have an effects channel here. So let's say I want to add an effects preset. All right, and I'm going to, we'll call this preset Patrick. Okay, so now when we go to Media Bay, we should be able to see it under user presets, so user content. So let's go to VST3 presets. And let me just try to rescan that. I thought it was on that plugin. Let me just. Okay, but now when we come over here, that would show up in the delay. But so let's say we go to our user content. We could now just kind of come right over here. And one of the things you could do is as you kind of scroll over is, let's see, sometimes we see the path here. So I'll just choose path. And then at this point, you could see that it's going to be going into like different preset libraries right here. So you can see that we'll have, my user account, library, application support, Steinberg track presets, different effects presets. They're all there. If you needed to actually, so you could find the path right there. And if you needed to, archive those and migrate them to other computers, all of your user presets will be transferred over in your profile manager as well. So, and it could be different on Windows or Mac, so slightly different locations. But if you look in Media Bay, you should be able to find it and find the path once you add the path in one of the fields. Okay, so we have a question. Can you render MIDI from external instruments like you can from VSTs? So generally, external instruments would need to be connected under audio connections as an external instrument. If the audio outputs is set to be an external instrument here and you're running it as an external instrument, you could render it in real time. But otherwise, you'd have to record it as audio because there's no way to get there's no way for Cubase to have the audio from the instrument unless it's been defined as an external instrument. Once it's been defined as an external instrument, you could render it. John Costigan has 2 revelations today of create lanes from versions, and he's like, I needed this reminder, so that's great. Okay, so we just see question. If I want an instrument track to respond to one MIDI channel only, the input transformer should be used for this. Could Greg go over why this is different to just selecting the channel in the inspector? All right, so we could have MIDI information coming in. So let's say we have our instrument here and we look at the inspector. Because we may have MIDI controllers that are transmitting on multiple MIDI channels simultaneously. So let's say if you're doing an electronic drum kit, you may be going to different sources. If you have a keyboard that's being layered and maybe you want, like on your keyboard, you're transmitting, different layers. So maybe you have MIDI channel 1 and MIDI channel 2 going to different MIDI channels, but MIDI channel 3 is only for particular, only above velocity 50 and higher, and layer 4 is below channel 50. And those are all going to different instruments. So when we set the instrument here in Cubase, this is going to allow you to take any of the incoming MIDI channel data, because it's kind of a pain to have to, for 99% of people, they would have a MIDI controller that kind of transmits into Cubase, and then Cubase takes the MIDI input and moves it to this particular MIDI channel. But if we wanted to have a MIDI channel that was set to MIDI channel any, we could take, multiple devices, like let's say we had multiple drum sets set up on this particular channel. At that point, we may want to take, my kick going to one instrument, the snare to another instrument, the hi-hats to a different instrument, the toms to a different instrument. And that way we could take multiple MIDI channels and remap it based upon like channel assignments in the drum editor. So that's why, when people sometimes record, we often get this message, we get a lot in the live stream. It's like, all my MIDI notes are doubled. And it's, the patch that they're playing from their keyboard is like a multi-patch. So every time they play a note, it's transmitting two different MIDI notes on different MIDI channels. So that's why in the input transformer, we would use the function to basically eliminate the doubles, and we would do channel filtering. But there may be times when you're trying to actually play multiple instruments on one MIDI track that's set to a MIDI channel any. And that's why we have that distinction. Okay. We see Nick just saying, in many of my arrangements, I've reached a point where explode seems an option. So at that point, you should take a break. But all right. Okay, so we have a question, a little question about colors. My track is blue, but when I record something in the event, it's red. How can I make the event color respect the same as the track? Thank you. So generally, if we have, I'll just jump to a different project here. So we'll have blue tracks in here already set up. So as you're recording into a project, so let's say, we have our track color set here. But let's say we're recording on particular tracks. It's very typical to have. So right now when we do this, awful automation. So as we record, just to indicate which tracks are record enabled, we'll see those tracks turn red, but it doesn't change the color of the events or of the track, but it's just kind of an indication that those particular tracks are red. So let's say if I have these set to, I'll just create an input here. So these probably don't have an input assigned, so let me just so now as I record in, and these tracks are armed while recording, just so that you have a sense of, to know which tracks are being recorded. The tracks themselves will turn red, but the events will still maintain the color. And then when you stop recording at that point, they will revert back to their colors. So it's just a visual indication to show you which tracks are record enabled and are recording. So let me know, Will, if that behaves differently for you. Okay, just seeing some discussion. All right, so we have Alexander checking in from Moscow. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so just see a question. I used Very Audio for editing many audio events. After further editing, I'm receiving a message when I open the project. Real-time algorithm was disabled because tone factor is out of limits. I think sometimes the only time I've come across that is if you're doing like a Very Audio edit, and check to make sure that there just wasn't like, if you look in your Very Audio edits, I'll come here, and the only time I've seen something like that is like if the, I think Very Audio is kind of originally designed for, intended for vocals. People obviously use it for lots of different things, but if it's move to a note, perhaps it's moved to a note that's kind of out of range of a particular vocal instrument. So make sure that as you do it, that you're not, that it's not a pitch that's been detected that is, so that is so far that it might, or maybe it's too high, for that might trigger a particular message like that. So just kind of do a visual look and see if you have a note that's really high or really low. Those may be accidentally moved. Okay, so we just see Riley, who I believe had a question about rendering, says, thanks, I usually create an audio track and hit record to render. Thought it'd be cool to render how VSTs do, though. So yeah, I agree that VSTs render better than external instruments. So that's why a lot of people use VSTs, just to workflows make a lot more sense. Some of my Yamaha colleagues feel differently. All right, so we have a question regarding mix staging. If we have a loud mix, what is the best way to down the volume? Some people talk about Q-Link on mixer and put down pre-gain on channels. Please explain. All right, so if we have, probably the best way, and I'll just revert this, if you needed to do some gain structuring on your mix, there's a couple of different ways to approach this. One thing is some people will come over here and, there's some things that could bite you unexpectedly depending on what processing you have. So let's say I have my mix kind of set up here. Okay, so some people will do what's called a Q-Link. So if I say, okay, I want to take all of my tracks here, and as we work with this, we could do a Q-Link, and now I could drag all these tracks' volumes down proportionally. Now, if we have effects going on, as we adjust the fader level, that may also affect the gain structure going to the effects. Some people will come over and let's say if we're in our full screen mixer view, we could come over and on each channel we have a pre section. So if I wanted to click on the correct things, let's get to the rack and go to pre. So once we have the pre section, we could also adjust gain on all selected tracks. Okay, and this is before it hits the fader. So if I wanted to adjust the pre-volume down, so, and that could also affect the gain structure in your mix. Probably the safest way to do this, if you needed to do this, is to send all the tracks to a VCA. And this could include your effects channels. So what we do is add a VCA channel, fader to selected channels. So now we've done this, I could have this one fader, and if I have automation, this won't affect the my automation curves will still be there, but I could adjust all the volume directly here without affecting everything going into different effects groups. So that's another way of being able to do it. Some people will just simply drop the volume of their master fader. So, but a VCA is a great solution for being able to gain stage correct when you need to. All right, so we have Frank checking in from Kingston in Canada. Thanks for joining us. All right. So we have a question. Is it possible to hide VST2 instruments and FXs using VST3 only, or just if I will use my own plugins folder? So let's say if I come to my studio menu, you can go to your VST plugin manager. So at this point, I think, if we select, let's say, I may not have any VST2, but I think if we, you could just go to the VST2 plugin paths and not have Cubase look into the particular VST2 plugin paths. So let's say if I come over, and I think if I see, I thought there was a way. But, for VST2 plugins, you could just come here and just, if you go to the actual information here, you could just cut off the VST2 plugin paths. So say if we go to, and there's also where if you click on, this is what I was thinking of. So if we go here and we click on the information window, that you could choose to hide that particular plugin. So you could also just hide your VST2 plugins right there. So you could give that a shot. All right, just reading through different comments. Okay, so I have a question. Hi, is there a way to lock the size of folders so that they stay the same size regardless of zoom level and don't take up as much space? If not, it would be helpful future feature. So I think it's kind of whatever you set to be on the folder. So let's say if I'm here, unless you physically, I don't think that there's a way to, let's see if we lock. Yeah. So, if you don't move it, it's not going to change size. So I don't think there's a way to lock the height, because you may want to add other things, but if you physically don't move it, it's not going to change the height of the folder. All right, so we see Levitsky just saying can't watch online because he's in Ukraine. So we wish you well and hope that you're able to stay safe. All right, and we see FJ Segovia from Madrid online. I'm going to go ahead and paste the Zoom meetup, and we'll get started here in about 20 minutes. So I'll post the Zoom details. So you see a user request from JVI wants MIDI sends on instrument tracks. I've been asking for it for a long time as well, so I'll reiterate it again. Okay, so we have, can you show where does quantize panel is located? When I open panel, it only shows half panel. So if we, right where we see the quantize here, and we click on the E, at that point we could see the quantize panel. So if we come over here, that's where we could access it. So if we go again, we see our quantized value set here. I think we get the same thing from the edit menu, and we could just see the quantized panel there. So let me know if that's how yours looks. All right, so we see, can you explain how to do fade in and fade out with the range selector tool? Some shortcut, please. Fade in independent of out. So let's say if I want it to come here, I'm going to select a range and just hit the letter A. So, so I'll just do this on another track. So if I have the range selected, so I'm just going to select a range here. And if I go to the end and hit A, it'll do a fade out. If I do it from the beginning, it'll do a fade in. So you could just hit the letter A to just kind of set your different fade ranges. So, or if you want it to be in the middle, just come here, hit fade, and then it'll do a fade in and fade out. So the letter A on the computer keyboard, try that. And it's based on whatever the range selection is. Okay, so we see from Robert Keene. Can you explain how the normalizing panel works? Does it normalize automatically when opened? I get very different results than expected, and sometimes nothing happens. So if we go to normalize audio, it could depend on your settings. So I'll come over here and let's go to our direct offline, or I'll just go to my processes and we'll choose normalize. So nothing will happen if you don't have auto apply. So, and we see this little checkbox for auto apply. So now when I come over here, if auto apply is checked, it will, when I open up when I open this up, it will automatically apply that. So make sure that when you go to, and it could be that auto apply is maybe turned on when you go to direct offline processing. So if I come over here and say normalize, it will now automatically apply that. If I undo that and I disable auto apply and I go to process, that it won't do it until we actually hit apply. So this could be the button you're looking for. Let me know if that helps. Okay, so we're just seeing Don Pipello just says, so just saying he needs just a fast solution for fade in, fade outs for audiobooks. Some of his sessions are 8 hours. So let me know if that works for you, what I showed. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to split a MIDI part without losing the MIDI events from the other half of the part? I would like to be able to split a MIDI part and trim it however I want. All right, so let's take a look. Let me just go to project here. Okay, so let's say if I'm here and I have a MIDI event. Okay, so let's say if I have now split, so we want to split a MIDI part without losing the MIDI events from the other half. So let's say I have cut here. So now even if I move this, so, you know, if it's been split, you know, we cut the event. Now see if we could maybe do it with the resizing. So say if I want to take this, and let's say if I resize the event and move, and let's say I copy this here. So now if I've resized the event and copied it, it's going to be kind of the full part. So now if I want to come here, we can still have the beginning and the end can still be there even if it's been split. So think about instead of resizing that maybe, or instead of cutting that you resize the events, and let's try another way of doing it, maybe with the range tool. So let's say if I want to crop this, we'll go to range to crop. And let's see if I can, so we could still, so even though we have all of the MIDI events that we see here, we could still kind of slide the events within the cropped range as well. So try cropping or resizing instead of cutting if you wanted to have access to the data before and after. All right, so we see, can you show some example of live drum quantizing? So I'm assuming this is audio drums, but if not, just let me know, because we can show you how to quantize on input. So I'll revert this, but let's say if I wanted to record live drums, like a drum recording like this. So let's say I'd have all these into a folder, and we listen to them with a click. So if we want to tighten up the drum performance, what I want to do is find kind of the hit points for different significant parts of the drum kit. So probably like the kick and snare. So let's go ahead and just kind of zoom in. And what we want to do is to have the kicks, but not necessarily the bleed through. So we could kind of adjust kind of intensity as well. Now let's come to my snare top. And I'll do the same for my snare top. So as we come here, we'll adjust kind of our threshold here. So let's say, okay, we want our threshold not for hi-hats that are bleeding through in our snare, but just the snare hits. And in this song, the hi-hat is pretty rhythmically significant. So we could zoom in here. And let's just adjust our hi-hats. So once we have some kind of basis of hit points, what I want to do now is we have these all in the folder, and I'm going to place these into group editing. So now when I select a particular event, all of them are selected. So we listen to our drums again with our click. And realize that these could be tighter. So what I want to do is to go to my quantize panel. And as I do this, we want to set priorities for our different drum sources. So I'm going to say my kick has high priority. My snare top will have kind of secondary priority. We give that 4 stars. And let's say my hi-hat will give it 3 stars. Now what it's done is basically in the background is it's placed markers based on those criteria, because if we have a snare hit, that snare hit is happening in the snare mic, top and bottom, maybe out of phase. The hi-hat mic, the kick mic is going to pick it up, the overheads, the tom mics. So if I move the snare track and don't move the bleed of all the other parts, then it doesn't work. You have all sorts of different phase problems. So now we've created markers. I'm going to slice these markers. So now it's created thousands of slices in our particular audio file. And what I want to do is say I want to quantize to 16th notes. And at this point, we'll just say, okay, I want to do the quantize. And now we'll see that all these different notes will be shifting. And as we look at the notes, sometimes we'll see gaps between notes. And when we have that, we want to just simply go to our crossfade editor and set crossfades between those events. So now if we want to take our real drums, that we could just come right over here and quantize your drums just like that. So once again, you want to put them into a group, find the hit points for like the main parts, kick, snare, at least, put group editing on, go to your quantize menu, and you could even do audio warp quantizing if you wanted to, and that could just simply stretch the audio to automatically fit as well. And then once you kind of do the quantizing, then you'll be able to have all of your drum quantizing kind of done for you. All right, so let's see. We have some more questions coming. Let's see. It may take a while to do the audio warping here. All right, let's see if we can get into. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. All right, looks like I made my Cubase by, let me just see if I could exit out of Cubase really quickly. Oh, it's all done, so. Okay, so great to see Michael Teams on the live stream. Okay, so we have a question from Soren. I have 2 sound cards, one with Bluetooth headphones to listen to the Hangout on YouTube, and the other used with Cubase, audio driver Yamaha. Bluetooth works great all the time, but every time I start Cubase, the Bluetooth is killed. So, you know, if you're using the like the Yamaha USB audio driver, it shouldn't have any impact on your it should, you know, that's kind of working independently of the computer operating system. So I don't see how that would kill the Bluetooth if you're using you know, so it says you're using the ASIO driver Yamaha. I'm just gonna, but every time I start Cubase, Bluetooth is killed. So make sure that, you know, that the primary audio interface, like when you go to your Windows, it doesn't switch to the Yamaha ASIO driver, that you have the primary interface set to your Bluetooth, and see if that helps. And just kind of further comment, does Cubase have some kind of Bluetooth disruption going on? So I think it's probably, you know, just maybe when you start Cubase, you wake up the audio driver and it thinks that that's going to be your primary audio driver for your Windows operating system. So, but you know, Cubase should be, you know, what's kind of why we did ASIO, so that we don't have to worry about all that stuff. All right, so we see a comment just on the splitting. Sometimes I have orchestral projects with lots of tracks. It'd be nice if the information didn't get lost when splitting a MIDI part, like an audio event. Well, remember, like when you cut a MIDI event, you're actually cutting the event, but when you do it for audio, it's handled differently because you're just playing back a portion of the particular audio file. But I understand kind of what you want to do. But try some of the other suggestions and see if that makes sense. Try just cropping it with the range tool. All right, I'm going to post the Zoom meetup link one more time here. We'll do it a couple more times because we're going to be migrating over in a couple minutes. And if you haven't hit the like button, please make sure you do hit the like button. And that allows us to continue to do these live streams. We see Jeff Zabelski from Chico, California. So we have a question from Space Cake. One other question: is it normal for the disk cache load to spike red when I move the start of playback location horizontal line? Not sure what it's called. So as you kind of play back, imagine if you have to immediately jump to 30 tracks of audio buffering very quickly. So it is pretty normal when we see that indication. It just means that it's trying to catch up with all the buffers. So when to be concerned about it is when you actually get to the point where it's, not, if it's constantly, stuck at that particular point and it's not allowing you to play back audio. So it's pretty normal. All right, so I'm going to paste the link for the Zoom meetup again. All right, we'll just give it a minute and we'll start to migrate. So we're going to start our Zoom meeting in about 1 minute. We'll see if there's any last minute questions before we migrate over. All right, so I will go ahead and launch the Zoom here on my computer and we'll start migrating over. All right, so once again, I'll see if we could open up the invitation here after I start the meeting. So we'll start. All right, so we have some more people joining. All right, so I'll just kind of here on the screen, if you want to look at you can see the meeting ID and the password here. So I'll leave this open as we get more people in. Some more people migrating over. All right, so we see uno momento. All right, and I'll wait just a minute. And we'll keep the I'll keep the live stream going so people can migrate over. Okay, well, just some more people. We see Chris Holland and Kerwin Young. Join the Zoom. Yes. Hey, thanks for joining. Okay, so we have some more people. I'll end the live stream here in just a minute.
Can you hear me, Greg?
Yep.
All right, Greg. Thanks for having this live stream once a month.
We do it twice a week.
I wanted to tell you, Greg, I bought Wave Lab Pro from Sweetwater when the Cubase was 40% off.
Mm-hmm.
Can you show me some features of that?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end the live stream. So bear with me a second. And
My friend Troy's here too. Here's a couple of houses down.
okay, all right. So I'm gonna end the stream. So we see everyone on the Zoom. Thanks for the great live stream. We'll see everyone on Tuesday. Okay, so now our live stream